Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Matthew Lee. I am an immigration attorney with the law firm of Tocci and Lee, and we are based, at least I'm based out of our Centerville office here on Cape Cod. I see a lot of familiar faces, so welcome again. Before we get started on this the seminar, where we're going to highlight the major changes and the new program, the new H2B program as issued by Department of Labor principally, I just want to make sure that everybody understands I am speaking on behalf of Tocci and Lee. I am not anyone's lawyer in here. This is not legal advice. This is just a summary of the new regulations and my interpretation of what that process is supposed to be like, or what it will be like. Fortunately, we have today two other H2B services or practitioners. One is Jane Bishop, and she's with Seasonal Workforce. Peak Season Workforce, and we have Mark Carchidi in the back, and his company is Antioch Associates. Okay, please, and I'm sure they are taking clients, and they'll be happy to give you your card if you haven't engaged a service to help you with your H2Bs. Our law firm is not taking any new clients for H2Bs. We're trying to get out of the business, and once you hear this, you'll see why. The first thing is understand that this is an immigration, Department of Labor governed program. It is not a business program. This is not the Small Business Association. It's not economic development. The Department of Labor, if you held a gun to their head, would say that they do not care about your businesses. They have one mission and one goal, and it's to protect American workers. And only after you have exhausted every single means to hire a U.S. worker will they then allow you temporary labor certification to go find a foreign worker. Okay? So much of what I'm going to tell you today makes no business sense. It's contrary to how businesses operate, especially in the hospitality services here on Cape Cod and across the country. It's not meant to help you run your business. Okay, so the sooner you understand that and accept that fact, the more palatable some of these regulations will be. So let's get started. And I'm sorry, there's about 31 slides. Okay, and I would say 28 of them are critical. All right, and only half of the slides are on the process. The other half is on your obligations and your liabilities and your record keeping, which you have to maintain to stay in compliance with the program for future years. Okay, so effective April 29th of this past year, U.S. Department of Labor, in conjunction with USCIS, issued these new concurrent regulations. They're right here. And they also issued prevailing wage regulations. In total, there's 750 pages of regulations. It used to be, back before 2008, that most of the H2Bs on Cape Cod were done, the legal process was done by restaurant, hotel, small business owners on their own. They used other agents to help identify people and do the human resources part of getting people to the United States, but most of the legal process was done on your own. Then in 2008, new regulations were passed, which are the current regulations that we're dealing with prior to April 29th, and those increased your obligations and the process significantly, so that I would say more than 50% of people that did these on their own stopped doing it on their own and hired either a law firm or a HR firm that specializes in H2B employees. I would say now, if you try this on your own and you're not a full-blown HR department, it's nearly impossible to do as a mom and pop operation and file all your paperwork with the state and with the Feds, Department of Labor, and also with and also stay in compliance for future years. There's been no change to the semi-annual cap of $66,000. So for those of you that have done the H2B program before, there's 66,000 H2Bs allowed per year that have never possessed H2B new 66,000 is a cap number. The USCIS issues 33,000 on October 1st, 33,000 on April 1st, and those are slotted for people that are not currently in H2B status. People that are in the U.S. in H2B status and have not exhausted 3 years are allowed to stay in the U.S., transfer between employers, and are not charged against the 66,000. There's been no change to that. Last year on April 2nd, this past year, April 2nd, the cap was met, which is the first time, I believe, in 5 years that the cap has been met. I don't know if the cap will be met next year. Is this new process so onerous that a lot of businesses will just avoid it altogether, thereby decreasing pressure on the cap? I don't know. The economy is doing very well. I know that the tourism business across the country is doing extremely well, so that's upward pressure against the cap. So where it ends up, I'm not sure. They may run out again. It's really hard to predict. I think we will see a movement towards larger establishments, larger businesses, larger hotel chains, larger restaurant chains. They may get into the H2B business because they can afford to hire lawyers or hire H2B companies to help bring their people in, whereas the smaller operations that only need 4, 5, 10 people a year, it may be cost prohibitive. There is no returning worker provision. Again, that was a provision back in 2007, 6, and 2005 that allowed people that were in H2B status the previous 3 years to come back and not count against the cap. But that hasn't been around for almost 8 years now. Okay, here's some acronyms you're going to see throughout the slideshow. When I talk about the feds, I'm normally talking about, or I'm referencing the U.S. Department of Labor, Employment Training Administration, Office of Foreign Labor Certification, and the certifying officer. So you'll see DOL, ETA, OFLC, or CO throughout. That's basically the Department of Labor office. U.S. Citizenship, CIS, National Processing Center, that's where the prevailing wages are determined. Wage and Hour Division, which is the enforcement arm of Department of Labor, who now have very specific enforcement, investigation and enforcement and fine and referral ability. U.S. workers include United States citizens, USC, lawful permanent residents, those are green card holders, refugees, asylees, and people that are otherwise permitted to work. In my opinion, that means it includes J1s. So when you see U.S. workers, it means people that are either U.S. citizens, green card holders, refugees, asylees, including J1s, because they are free agents. They're allowed to work for anyone if they enter the U.S. as a J1. That's my opinion. That's my legal reading of the regulations. Workers in corresponding employment, you'll see that CE quite a bit. You'll see the acronym IDN. Everything goes to the first date of need for your H2B worker. So a lot of the timelines that they give you go backwards from the first day of need. So if your first day of need is April 1st and it says no earlier than 90 days, my slides will say no earlier than NET 90 days 1DN. All right, so that's just to help you get through the slides. The application for temporary labor certification, that's the actual application. It's also Form 9142B. The new form hasn't been issued yet. They're still going through the regulatory process of coming out with the newest form. Department of Labor states to use the old form until the new form is ready. And then you'll also see acronyms, the SWA. That's the State Workforce Agency, the Mass Department of Unemployment and Insurance. That's actually incorrect. It is no longer MassDOA, but the state is back involved. So if you remember the H2B process prior to 2008, there was an office at up at the State House that helped with the recruitment process. They are now again involved in the process. Okay. The regulations tweak the definition of the H2B program and what an employer is. An employer can hire foreign workers if they can prove that there's no qualified and available U.S. workers identified, and there's no adverse effect to wages or working conditions of similarly employed U.S. workers. Again, U.S. workers means U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, asylees, refugees, and others that are authorized to work, J1s. Employer must possess a federal employer ID number, tax ID number. They must have a place of business in the U.S. It's only for non-agricultural work. And now your temporary employment, it always had to be full-time. It continues to be a full-time requirement, but the full-time requirement is no less than 35 hours now. It did go as low as 30 hours, but now you have to guarantee a minimum 35 hours. You have to have a fixed work week. We'll talk about that. And you can no longer ask for anything more than 9 months. Okay, it used to be up to a year, then it went down to 11 months, and then it went to 10 months, and now their Department of Labor states that other than under extraordinary circumstances, you cannot ask for more than 9 months. Extensions are technically possible in the regulations, but I think are impossible in practice. And the one-time need can be for up to 3 years. Again, I don't think there's going to be a situation in Cape Cod where you have a one-time need. And we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. Application required for each work site, each job opportunity for one period of employment. So that's one dishwasher in Harwich from April 1st to November 30th. That would be one application. If any three of those changes, the work site changes, the period of employment changes, or the job changes, that requires a second application. Okay? One of the questions we had yesterday was, can you have staggered applications? I'm sorry, yesterday I did a similar seminar. I looked it up this morning before I came over, and on page 97 in a very, that's for some of you that are actually reading the regulations. On page 97, in a passing comment in the regulations comment area, there's one sentence that says that if you have separate needs, if you have staggered needs, for instance, you have a need for 20 housekeepers, but you want to break it up because the beginning of your season, you're not that busy, okay? And the end of the season, you're not that busy. So if you want to break that up into 5 housekeepers, same job location, and we'll bring them in March, and they stay until December, but bring the other 15 in between May and September, can you do that? That was one of the questions we had. Under the current, or the old system, you could do that. I was not able to find anywhere in the regulations that you were permitted to do that now. I found it, page 97, there's one little sentence that says that in those situations you should file 2 applications. So I'm going to mail out to my clients anyways that it is permitted because it's on, like I said, page 97 of the comments of the regulation, all right? And it's in kind of an obscure area. Okay, and excuse me if I didn't pick it up the first time. There was only 750 pages of these that I had to go through. All right, H2B program. This hasn't changed. You have to demonstrate temporary need. Okay? It's the nature of the employer's temporary need and not the nature of the job duties that control. So it's not the fact that you have lifeguards, right? It's your business as a company that your business is seasonal or has a peak need. It's not the nature of the job that's necessarily seasonal. So lifeguards and lift operators in the ski resorts. It's not necessarily what they do that controls. It's the ski resort's need. It's the need of your operation. Seasonal, this hasn't changed again. This is, again, it's basically a business that opens and closes. Therefore, jobs are open and available, and then they go away. Okay, that's a seasonal need. So if you have your business opens and closes every year, or you have a certain business operation that ceases to operate for a certain part of the year, then that would be a seasonal need. Peak load would be you always have these people, you always have housekeepers because your resort is open year-round, but in the summer months, it just happens to be based on seasonal need. But in a certain period of the year, you have a peak need for those positions. That hasn't changed. Okay, so there's a seasonal need, a peak load need. Intermittent need, we've talked about this before. It is essentially a a software company that's releasing a new software, release 6.0, and they need it translated into 120 different languages for release. It doesn't occur every single year. It only occurs intermittently. They need translators to come in. That would be an intermittent need. One-time occurrence is very similar to that. The difference is, for a one-time occurrence, you can technically ask for people up to 3 years. So if we were in the running for the Olympics, and we had 4 years, we had 3 years to get ready for the Olympics, and you're a construction crew, and you had to build the stadium for the Olympics, you could technically bring people in for one-time need to work construction for your company, because the Olympics will likely not come again in the future. It's very irregular. It's a one-time need, okay? But it has to be that much of a temporary singular need, okay? That hasn't changed, so you still have to prove all of that. Now we get to the process. This has changed quite a bit, especially at Department of Labor, stage 1. Now, you have to register. There's a registration period for every employer. No earlier than 150 days and no later than 120 days before the first day of need. So if April 1st is your first day of need, you as a company have to register that company no earlier than November 1st. Okay, and no later than December 1st. Then you have to also, or concurrently, you have to get a prevailing wage. That hasn't changed. The form hasn't changed. It's still 9141. There's about the Department of Labor promises a 60-day turnaround. By the way, there's some requirements on the Department of Labor to turn things around in specific periods of time. There's no, and I read the regulations over and over again, there's no repercussions if they don't. All right, so if they don't turn something around in the 7 days they're supposed to, or the 60 days, there's no right of action by us as an employer to make them do it. All right, so I think they're more guidelines than anything else, whereas the timelines for us, the employer, they're very strict, and they'll deny applications based on it. It's just the way the world works. There is the application for temporary labor certification, ATLC, which is also the 9142 in Appendix B. You have to file that simultaneously with a job order with the state, no earlier than 90 days, no later than 75 days before the first day of need. Once you file those two, to file those, you have to have the registration done and approved, and you have to have a prevailing wage in hand. Then you get to file the ETA Form 9142 and the job order simultaneously with the state. Allegedly, the Department of Labor, CO, will issue a notice of acceptance within 7 days telling the state to activate the job order. That means the state will then do their recruitment for us. And we have 14 days, we have 10 days to respond to that recruitment order. That means you have to get all your recruitment done and respond back. Once you've responded, Department of Labor is supposed to issue a decision within 7 days. We'll see if that happens. And we're going to go through each one of those processes in great detail in a moment. This is just the overview slide. Stage 2 is with USCIS, and Stage 3 is with the State Department in getting the people new visas if they're outside the country. And then I've got really a Stage 4, because I've advised all my clients that as soon as the H2Bs arrive, you have some record-keeping, earnings record-keeping obligations that you should start right away and not wait for a year until you're audited, okay? We're advising our clients to start a earnings log immediately. All right, so stage 1 is your registration. Again, you cannot register earlier than 150 days and no later than 120 days before your first day of need. So you've got to go back to what your first day of need is going to be. Once you're registered, it's valid for 3 years unless there's changes to your initial request. So if you state that you need 10 workers from April 1st to November 30th, and then you're registered for that, you will get, and it's approved, for the next 2 more years, including the year that you're registered, for 3 years, you don't have to re-register unless there's a change in the number of workers you ask for from year 1 to year 3, or there's a change in the period of time by more than 30 days. What do you file to register? The form isn't done yet. And I spoke to Jane before, and they still don't have the form, and they're not requiring registration yet. But they will be requiring it, I believe, for next spring. So the form should be out any day. Okay? But again, there's a registration process, and they don't even have the forms ready. All right? So we have to register. You're supposed to file with that registration form the H2B period that you're requesting, the number of workers you're requesting, and then your temporary need. Will they accept what we've been submitting in past years, the seasonal payroll report, which shows how many full-time employees you have versus how many temporary employees you have, and it shows the nice bell curve to show how many people you need and when you need them. I don't know if they're going to accept that in this registration. I assume they will. You would also need to submit marketing materials to evidence temporary need, and it very specifically states that, that you need an original signature by the employer. So first stage is we've got to file this registration, or you as a company have to file your registration with a form to be announced with all this material proving the seasonality of your need for a very specific number of workers for a very specific period of time. And all this material has to be retained for 3 years in an audit file. If the number of workers, while you're, so once the registration's obtained, it's good for 3 years. If your company, if you're requesting more than 10 workers and the number of workers you need in year 2 changed by more than 20%, so now you'd need 13 workers in year 2, but you were only registered and approved for 10, you have to re-register. If you're an employer with under 10, it's 50% greater need would make you re-register. So there's a little bit of flexibility. So if you're approved for 10 workers, you can ask for 12 during that registration period, but if you go to 13, you'll have to re-register. You can also expand and contract your time period so long as in aggregate it's not for more than 30 days. So if you go from April 1st, you register from April 1st until November 30th, but you want a little bit shorter next year, April 15th to November 15th, you can do that so long as in aggregate the change hasn't been more than 30 days. Okay? If it is, you have to re-register. And again, you've got to create this massive audit file. So everything you file with the feds for registration, make a duplicate copy in your in an audit file. Okay. All right. Again, during the registration periods, what evidence do they require of temporary need? I think it's going to be that summary payroll report. I think in your package we gave you a copy of that, or you should remember what they look like from years past. Jane, you used the same form.
Right, it's called a wage summary report. The Labor Department calls it an attachment A. But when you ask the Labor Department for the attachment A, they can't tell you what the form is. Just ask for the wage summary.
It's not an official form.
Right.
It's just, Mark, you guys use the same form? Right, no, we did too. All it is it's a, is there anyone here that's unfamiliar with that form? Okay, so everybody knows the form we're talking about. It just shows all your temporary, your full-time year-round workers, and you break them out. So if you are a seasonal business, you will have, because you close every year, you won't have a full-time side, okay? If you're a peak load where you're operating year-round and you have 3 housekeepers that are full-time year-round, they're going to be on the left side of your form. So it says 2 housekeepers, how many hours they work, January, February, March, April, through December, and what that work is worth, okay, the actual salary paid. The right-hand side is your temporary workers, so that is all of your H2Bs, if you've hired them in the past, J1s, college kids, any U.S. worker will be placed on the left-hand side, or the right-hand side of the form. Do you have that, Jane, in front of you? Okay, so here's your permanent year-round workers. So if you are a seasonal, this is obviously a seasonal business, they have no year-round full-time workers, and they have temporary workers. I think there's going to be, I think there's a major change in how these are supposed to be created. But for now, I just want you to see what we're talking about, okay? So if you are a peak load need, you would have 2 housekeepers all year round here and their hours worked, and then you'll have the bell curve. And that bell curve is how they determine what your season is, when and how many people you need. Now, you're supposed to, in case of an audit, have the supporting payroll documents that support these numbers, okay? And our clients submit those to us. We have them just in case you're audited, so we're not searching for them, okay? Thanks, Jane. Okay, let's see here. If you'll remind me, Jane, when I get to the corresponding workers, I'll talk about why I think that form has to be computed differently now. Corresponding and incumbent workers. So I think that form is still going to be accepted to prove seasonal need during the registration period. They'll also accept signed work contracts agreements. If you're a new business or you just acquired a new business where you think you're going to have a greater need because you just bought this business, then it's all right to submit contracts or agreements that show that you did acquire this business to support your future need, even though you don't have payroll records from prior years. USCIS, Department of Labor doesn't care for it, but USCIS likes sales, payroll, occupancy tax reports to evidence temporary need. All of our clients submit their Department of Revenue, State Department of Revenue occupancy taxes that you can just go online and print out every single month what you paid in occupancy tax if you're a hotel, bed and breakfast, and for meals taxes if you're a restaurant. And again, those taxes will usually correlate to what your season is and improve seasonality. It doesn't necessarily prove seasonality of the job. That's why the Department of Labor doesn't care for it, but USCIS loves it, so we give it to them. Okay, so you've registered your company, and hopefully it's going along. Jane, they didn't do the registration yet. We don't know how long that registration period is going to take, and how long it's going to take Department of Labor to issue you the registration. Okay, but you can't do it more than 150 days out. But you can't do any recruitment until 90 days. So there's a 2-month, 3-month window there that they have time to register you. The problem is if they tell you in the last few weeks whether you've registered or not, it may put you behind the 8 ball as far as the season goes. Okay. At the same time, you want to come up with a very precise job description, because you have to submit a prevailing wage request with the U.S. Department of Labor National Processing Center. The form's the same. You do it on the iCert system, which is online at the U.S. Department of Labor website. You've got to create an account, and you pull down the 9141, and you put the job description in there. Hopefully, it will. The Department of Labor says they will adjudicate the prevailing wage once it's submitted for 60 days. You can file multiple prevailing wage requests, so don't be afraid. So like if you screw one up, you can cancel it and then submit another one, okay? But every time you submit it, that's going to start that 60-day clock again. We do a lot of other things for prevailing wages in the office, and 60 days is about right. That's how fast they turn around all types of prevailing wages. Hopefully, the prevailing wage will be valid until you start recruitment, okay? Don't know yet.
The prevailing wages that are coming back now are good until June 30th,
Good.
2016. So file them all now.
Good. So that's what we're doing at our office. We've told everybody, all of my clients, to go ahead and confirm their job description so that we can file the prevailing wage immediately. And the reason they are valid until June 30th of next year is that that's when the prevailing wages change. They change every July 1st. So that's good. So it's not going to be 90 days. That's excellent. Okay, you have to offer and pay the highest of whether it's the federal, state, or local minimum wage, the prevailing wage, or if you're a union shop, whatever you've collectively bargained for. So whichever wage is the highest, you have to pay it. So if the prevailing wage comes back at $10, but the Massachusetts prevailing wage goes to $11, that's what you have to offer. Okay? So it has to be the highest of all those wages. If you have multiple work sites, you have to pay the highest prevailing wage if you're going to put it on a single application. So if you're a landscaper and you have jobs on the Cape, we're all considered essentially one prevailing wage area. But if you send your crews and you send that worker up to Hingham or Dartmouth or Cohasset to do jobs up there, that's a different prevailing wage. You have to submit both prevailing wages for both work sites, and you've got to have to offer everybody the highest if you don't break them out into a separate application.
Provincetown is now the Boston rate and Nantucket rate, so Provincetown is now different.
There you go. All right.
So if you're working in Provincetown, you need to make sure that's clearly said, because on landscapers, every community on Cape Cod, except Provincetown is one way, Provincetown is a higher rate on everything.
In Nantucket?
Right, it actually matches the Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard rate.
Right, which is what it used to be. It used to be in the prior to 2008, the P-Town, Provincetown, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard were considered it's a separate regional area.
And I was factoring that again.
Very good. Thank you. You shouldn't ask for unduly restrictive requirements, and you should avoid combination of job duties. Okay. It used to be that you could ask for general kitchen workers. So they did some dishwashing, they did some prep cook work, they did some bussing. Okay. The Department of Labor has always stated that if you combine job duties like that, we're going to assign the highest wage. So even though the person may be doing dishwashing for 90% of their job, if you say that they touch a knife and they do some prep food, they're going to charge you a prevailing wage at the highest level as a prep cook. Okay? So be wary of combining job duties. It'll only it will only inflate your prevailing wage. You can ask for minimum requirements. You can say, we only want housekeepers with 2 years of experience. We require 3 years of prep cook work, making New England seafood, okay? You can ask for minimum requirements. It's not prohibited. The problem with that is, one is you will probably get a level 3 or level 4 higher wage and not the H2B wage. The second problem is you have to prove all your workers possess that at the embassy or with USCIS when you get to that stage. So if you say you require 2 years of experience and you're disqualifying all your workers during the recruitment process because they don't have 2 years of experience, be aware that your employee, when they go to get to the embassy to get their H2B visa, will have to produce work letters to show that they have 2 years worth of work experience. And you have to have, and if it's a transfer from another resort to you and the requirement's 2 years of work experience, USCIS is supposed to require you to prove that each worker has 2 years worth of work experience. Okay? So again, avoid unduly restrictive requirements. You must specify on your prevailing wage all deductions from pay not required by law. So those things that are required by law, you don't have to specifically state them on the prevailing wage or your job offer, okay? Now, that's another thing. I'm going to be talking about job order, job offer, and the prevailing wage form. They're all the same thing for all intents and purposes. You have to put the same content on all three of those things, no matter how I reference it, okay? So your job offer must specify all deductions. So that means all your ads, your prevailing wage request has to state all deductions from pay not required by law. So if you're going to require them to buy a special type of uniform, which you're not supposed to anyways, and make them pay for it, you have to put that on the form. Even if it's 100% voluntary, so you arrange for housing and you're going to deduct the housing from their paycheck, and they have a whole contract that's completely voluntary, you have to put that on the wage form. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it's voluntary or not. If anything comes out of their paycheck that's not a tax that's required by the government, you have to put it and disclose it. The new prevailing wage system, well, it's not really new. We've had it for 2 years now. It is the mean wage, okay? It is the lowest worker, the entry-level worker in the occupation, the most experienced occupation. They cut it right in half. It is what it is. Yes?
Just on the follow-up, the deductions, even if they're not being deducted, those job orders that we've been getting come back have specifically said if it's a tool that the employee is required
Right.
to purchase, whether it comes up deducted or not. That has to do with transportation.
Yes, and we're going to go through all the different types, but if anything touches that pay, it's got to be disclosed in the prevailing wage or in the job offer and all the ads. Okay? Thanks, Mark. Now, there is a new form, the ETA Form 9165, and there's a provision in the prevailing wage regulations that states that an employer can submit a private employer wage survey. Okay? It can be either a disinterested third-party survey, a state-conducted survey, or an employer association, so long as the association has non-H2B employers as part of it. As of last week, when I completed this, there has been no private employer wage survey approved by the Department of Labor. Okay? And I will guarantee you, if you submit one, that it will delay your prevailing wage by, I bet it'll take you almost 6 months. Okay? So if you think you can come up with a wage that, that satisfies one of these three types, you can try to submit it, but it's going to delay your entire process because you can't go to the recruitment phase without a prevailing wage in hand. Okay? What else on that? And also, as you know, I'm involved here on the Cape Cod. I don't know of a private survey that's available on the Cape for Cape employers that would satisfy any of these. Do you, Jane? Mark?
There are none.
There are none. There was a company 2 years ago, this lady from Texas was faxing all H2B employees, and I still don't know how she got the list. She was faxing all H2B employees on the Cape saying that we have a private wage survey. I forget what it was, $600 or something. You pay them, and they'll give you the survey. And I called her, and I said, who created this survey? Well, I can't tell you that. It's a private survey. We've got it. It complies. I go, how many of you submitted? And this was after the season. She said, we submitted 60. How many were approved? Well, only one, and that's on appeal. So be wary of anything you get on the fax or email. At least she was honest with me. I mean, she was dead honest. She goes, no, we've had 60 denials, and only one has been approved.
If you think this summer I was intense, there was one that DOL had a week ago that was an hour long on just submitting the application, submitting a survey.
Survey, right.
And how you
Right.
go through that process and how long.
Right, it's not going to happen. But technically, there's a way to do it. All right, so now you have your registration, because you registered 150 days in advance. You've at least filed for your prevailing wage, because that could take 2 months. No earlier than 90 days, no later than 75 days. So this is, for April 1st start date, we're talking January 1st, okay? So on January 1st, if you have the registration and a prevailing wage, you file simultaneously with the Department of Labor the 9142 and the Appendix B. So that's your application for temporary labor certification. All right. Again, the new form is going to be issued hopefully by January. You file it, and simultaneously you file your job description, your job request, your job offer with the state. All right. And so you place what's called a job order with the state that's identical to what you described on your prevailing wage. Okay? With the Department of Labor, you have to file the Appendix B, which is signed and scanned by you, the employer, your valid H2B registration number, which you've received earlier, your received prevailing wage form, a copy of the job order, which is your job description for the state to advertise, plus now you have to submit at that time your contract with any agent or recruiters that you've engaged in helping you with the process. So if you, employer, are using Jane's company or Mark's company or a company in Jamaica or a company in Bulgaria, you're using a company or an individual to help you with any part of the H2B process other than lawyers. You have to have a contract with them, and you have to have very specific language in that contract. In your package, you have that language right here, 20 CFR 655.20. That was literally cut and pasted from the regulation. That language has to be in your contracts with your agents.
What page are you?
It's a second, it should be towards the back of your PowerPoint. Okay? Now, and that's actually, I mean, a specific language wasn't provided the last 5 years, but the rule was that you had to have specific language in a contract with anyone that helps you, stating that they can't pass on any of the fees to the worker. Okay? But now they've given you actual specific language to incorporate. All right. Further, the new regulations now require you not only to have that language in a contract with any third party that's helping you, but that third party has to provide you with the name and employees that they employ. Okay? So if Jane's company has people in Jamaica and people in Bulgaria and people around the world that are working as an agent of hers or an employee of hers to help locate and identify people, you have to request from your agent the names of their employees and their addresses. Okay? What was happening was that in certain countries, you may engage a very legitimate company in Jamaica to help find workers for you. And you have this language and you've told them, don't extract any fees from the workers. And they don't. I believe that. But what happens is they then get the people that are on the street knocking door to door to find workers. Those workers are asking people for money to be referred to the agent, to be referred to you, the company. So that's what they're trying to get at. All right? They're trying to go all the way down and drill down to the door-to-door knock. All right? The people that, if anybody along the way is extracting any fees from the employee, they want to know who they are. Okay? And that you, the agent, your agent, is making sure that their employees aren't doing it.
To add a note to that, there also, we called and talked to the Labor Department. If you've got a worker that's working for you and they say, I got a friend, I know somebody, how do you know that that worker is not charging a fee? Because we actually have a client where this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the employer didn't know that their really good cook in the kitchen was charging $50 or $100 for all the other cooks that he recommended. So you need to actually get to that level. If you are asking one of your current H2B workers to find you some workers, you need to know if they're charging a fee, and you need to let that worker know that you're going to be putting that information in, so that worker expressly knows they cannot charge.
And that was a question that came up yesterday in my other seminar, whether if there's no company, you're not dealing with a company. You've got 20 H2Bs, and one of the H2Bs has been coming back to work for you for the last 12 years, and they're the local, they're basically kind of gathering everybody up and coordinating. Do they have to be disclosed as an agent? And that's really, it's fact specific, okay? It's up to you as an employer whether you think that that person should be disclosed or not. And if it turns out that that employee actually, and you don't disclose them as an agent or a person that's assisting you, and you say that you don't have an agent, which I think is legitimate, then you better make sure that that person is not paying anyone, because if it ever comes back that one of the workers is actually charging people, then you're going to be found in violation. So I can't tell you to do that, all right, or not, but you've got to really do your due diligence on whether you want to disclose that person or not. You're probably better off disclosing that person. Right, saying that, well, yes, one of my H2B workers, they're not a real company, but this is the person. And I've written a special contract, or I've written an email or a letter to that person telling them that they can't extract any fees from the workers themselves. Okay? All right. Yes, Walt.
When, just get back to the fee structure again. Say if you are using an agent
Mm-hmm.
that charges a fee.
Yep.
What it says is that they cannot pass the fee on to the worker.
Correct.
The employer has to pay back the fee.
Correct.
But they can charge a fee.
No, they can't charge any fee to the worker.
Not to the worker. We have to we have to pay the agent directly.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. The agent that's working with the actual workers can't charge them a penny.
Right, okay. But
Okay.
not saying that there can't be a fee.
Right. Right. They can charge you, the employer, the fee.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to encourage. Very good. In the reg state that when you file the temporary labor certification that you're supposed to submit supporting temporary need documents again. I don't know why it states that, because that's what the whole registration period was for. But nevertheless, it's in there. The certifying officer can deny, request further information, or issue a notice of acceptance within 7 days. Again, everything you submit with that form has to be kept in a 3-year audit file. Further, most of these documents are submitted on iCert. Whenever this new form comes up online, it'll be on iCert. And there's a PDF function. So you put all these supporting documents up on a PDF. If you forget to put a document on, you cannot supplement that filing. You have to refile everything again. All right, so if you, oh shoot, I forgot to put the summary payroll report, or I forgot to put the prevailing wage on there, there's no way to supplement that application. You have to withdraw it, file another one, and scan another set of documents up. Okay? All right. So at the same time you file your actual labor certification application with all the supporting documents with the Department of Labor, the same day you should be filing your prevailing wage or job order with the state. Massachusetts now has the Massachusetts Executive Office of Labor Workforce Development, Department of Career Services, Foreign Labor Certification Unit. The head supervisor there is a person named Jose Ocasio. Lance Lambros, who is the aide for Senator Vinnie DeSimato, was kind enough to introduce me to Jose in that office, and they even had the general counsel's office. My greatest fear was that the state had no idea they had this obligation. Okay, I am happy to report that Jose is on it. He's read the regulations. They actually have a form by which you're going to request your job order with the state. Okay, all a job order is an exact punctuation, commas, exact same job description with all deductions and benefits that you submitted with your prevailing wage is going to now be put on this job order form that the state has drafted. They sent me the draft form. I sent it to Mark and to Jane. They're looking for comments, and they want to finalize the form by October 1st. So they're going to have a form that we fill out. So you, your agent, or your attorney will fill out this form, and again, it's an exact job description that you put on the prevailing wage form, okay? And they're not going to match specifically. So what we've done in our office in different types of immigration cases is you literally take the entire prevailing wage description and you paste it into the big job description comment with all the other things, even because some of the blocks won't match up, okay? Just make sure that somewhere on that form you put everything that you put on the prevailing wage, okay? So what happens is you submit this job order with the state for them to help you recruit for U.S. workers. You filed the application with the Department of Labor. They go in simultaneously. Now this is how it's supposed to work. The state has 6 days from receiving that job order request to notify the feds whether they have any objection to the process. The feds on the 7th day, if there's no objection, is supposed to review the state's comments, if any, review your job order, and say, go ahead, state, start the recruitment. That's how it's supposed to work. Jane told me this morning that she's done some for winter resorts, not Massachusetts, but in other states, Florida and Arizona.
Florida and Arizona.
That there's been a dialogue between the state and the feds are going back to the state, add this, 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 and this, and then the state goes back to them. So there's this circular queue between the feds and Department of Labor that's going on, and it's not smooth. So the fact that the reg state on the 7th day, you're supposed to get this notice of acceptance if everything's okay, don't bet on it. Now, having said that, I have some confidence in Massachusetts that they're at least taking it seriously and they're on top of it. All right. Jose has an entire unit. You might remember Juanita Stein. She's actually going to be coming back and consulting that unit on how to do all this. So that's good news. he was a little bit vague on how available they're going to be on phone calls and things. But again, the state only controls one little portion of it. So what the state's supposed to do is once they get a notice from the feds and you, the employer, gets a notice of acceptance that says, okay, the job order's fine, you've registered, you've got the prevailing wage, state, go ahead and post it and do recruiting. Employer, go ahead and do your recruiting. The job order, this is the state's portion of it, is they're going to post it wherever they're going to post it on the state job bank. It may be on JobQuest. I have a feeling it will be. Okay, that's the one that we've been using the last 4 or 5 years. But we don't have to do that. All we're going to do is fill out that job order form. The state will likely put it on JobQuest. They definitely are going to contact the Career Service Center here in Hyannis and notify them of the job opening. And now they have to put it on an all states job bank. So every unemployment office in the country will get this, plus all neighboring states will get this. So Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Connecticut, all neighboring states will also be asked to advertise your job position on Cape Cod. All right. Now, stepping back, I've read this regulation 4 times, 3 times, 3.5, 4 times, 750 pages. The more I read it, this is what the Department of Labor is trying to do. They're saying that you, employer, if you're going to go through this effort and hire an agent, and many of you employers actually get on an airplane, go to Jamaica, or I've got an employer that actually goes to South Africa to interview H2Bs. If you're going to make all this effort, you're going to pay for their transportation in and outbound, and you're going to pay the prevailing wage. If you're going to make this effort for foreign workers, we're going to make you do a national search for workers. We want you to hire people from Louisiana that are unemployed, Arkansas that are unemployed, Biloxi, Mississippi that are unemployed. We want you to offer the same benefits and the same conditions of employment that you are traveling around the world for U.S. workers. Okay? So the more you read these regulations, that's their sole goal, is to turn this from a local search in February on Cape Cod, where obviously there's not going to be enough people available for this job in April, to now a national search where it's incumbent upon you as employers to at least consider paying for the travel expenses of that unemployed person in New Orleans to come and work for you. Okay? That's what they're getting at. Mark, do you disagree with that? Jane?
Absolutely.
That's,
Seeing that happen.
and we're seeing, okay, so, and that's what I don't know yet, okay, because I haven't seen it. If Jane's seen a little bit of it, will U.S. workers, will an unemployed person in New Orleans actually get on an airplane, come here, work for you, and then go back? I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Yes, Walt?
What about the interview process for somebody in
Over the phone.
Skype.
Skype or over the phone.
So you can't really saying that you need to be for an on-site interview is not.
Correct. You can't say that.
Unless you fly them in to interview with you and fly them back.
Right. Okay, so they want you to do a national search. It's that simple. Okay. Again, I don't know what numbers and how many people from across the country are truly going to want to disrupt. You know, I'd rather be unemployed in my home than unemployed somewhere I don't know anybody, right? So I don't know if what the Department of Labor is trying to do is actually going to employ more unemployed people around the world around the country to the spots where there is employment. I just don't know if it's going to work. But that's their intent. Now, the job order, the state, yeah. Well,
Say, for instance, in a situation where you provide housing for your H2B.
we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Every benefit has to be the same across the board. So when the state gets this job order and they get the notice of acceptance to go ahead and start the recruitment at the state level, it's going to stay active for 21 days prior to the first day of need. So even though you have 10 days to wrap up the recruitment period, they're going to keep it on the job board for 21 days up until the first day of need. In the comments to the regulations, it states that you as an employer, you have an obligation to tell all your workers that their job may be canceled 21 days before. If you have bought the airplane ticket ahead of time, too bad, employer. You are on notice that your H2Bs can, your 10 people that were approved, if you get 3 people that are fully qualified up to 21 days before they are supposed to arrive, so that'd be March 7th for April 1st, you wrapped up your recruitment in February, right? You did the recruitment. You actually have a certification in your hand that says you can bring in 10 dishwashers, right? You did everything you're supposed to, but you get an applicant on March 6th, and you can't disqualify them. You have to employ them. It doesn't state what you're supposed to do at that point. As my reading of the regulation is, if you've been approved for 10, you better not bring 10 in. You should bring in 9, tell one of them they can't come, and document that you hired the one, because in an audit next year, they're going to see that the state referred a person to you on March 6th, and they want to see what you did with that person. Yes?
But the alternative is, if you've been approved for the 10, bring the 10, hire the additional person.
Right.
Considering that you're gonna be able to meet the 3/4 guarantee, you're gonna have additional.
We're going to talk, right. So if you, that is another alternative. You can hire the 10 and hire the other, the 6th worker. I mean, the 11th worker that showed up on March 6th, okay? You can do that, but again, you may have to explain why you have that extra need and that you didn't explain that when you initially registered, okay?
When you do extension workers that way, though, that is an even bigger problem. You want 3 dishwashers, no one's come from the state, you have 3 in-country extension workers, meaning they're working, a summer job, they're going to winter. You've got it up at USCIS, you've got them named, and the state sends you 3 dishwashers to hire after you've already at USCIS.
Right.
Now you have to cancel, if you hire those, what you've done at USCIS.
Yeah, and you don't get the feedback.
And you're right, you just lost $1,700. And you've got 3 very angry in-country extension dishwashers who you offered a job to, and now you've got to retract it.
And you have to pay for their, because you have a certified H2B, you have to pay for them to go home, but they've never worked a day for you.
Correct.
Yes, Walt?
When you go to DOL with, say, 10 slots, there's nothing saying you have to bring in 10 people. You can bring in 8 people.
No, but in an audit in a subsequent year, they'll say, why didn't you bring in all 10? And that you overstated it and you should have brought in only 8. But you'll see in a few slides down why you don't want to overinflate how many people you need. If anything, you want to go to the absolute bare minimum. You'll see. Trust me. You never want to inflate.
Well, I don't mean maybe your need is, but then you realize I only need 8 out of the 10, and
Correct.
You've got work certs for 10, but
Right.
you're not going to do anything about those 2 open slots. You just let them hang there.
Right, but during the course of an audit the next year, they're going to ask you, why did you ask for 10 when you only used 8?
You better have 2 Americans to fill those
2
open
jobs.
slots.
That's not new. Is that new?
No, that's always been the case. I mean, they've always audited you for that.
Really?
Okay. The advertisement or the contents in that job order has to be identical to what you put on all your ads, right? So the state's going to put this job order on the bank for up to 21 days before the first day of need, okay? You as the employer have to do ads. You have to include in your job order with the state and in all ads and recruitment, you have to include all of that information. Employer's name, contact information, in the exact work site, full-time, that it's temporary, and then it's no less than 35 hours a week. You have to state the days of the week, hours per day, and the start and end times for your week, okay? So that means 35 hours a week, 5 work days in over 7 days, 7 hours per day, and then general start and end times. All right? You have to put the number of openings, the start and end dates for the entire H2B period, the entire job description, the wage offered, and if overtime is available, and that, in quotes, employer will use a single work week for computing wages starting. So you have to state, and everyone can have a different work week, but you have to specifically state in your ads what your pay period work week is. So if it's Sunday at 12:01 a.m. or 12 a.m. and the work week ends at Saturday at 11:59 p.m., you've got to state that that's how you compute your wages and that's your work week. That has to be on the ads. You have to state the frequency of pay, and it can't be longer than 2 weeks. You have to state that you will reimburse travel and subsistence to initiate employment. We're going to get into that in more detail in a minute. You have to state that all visa-related costs will be reimbursed within the first week of employment. That's all related costs except for their own passport.
So what about the reality that you hire somebody to come as an H2B on May 15th? From May 15th on, they must pay the 35 hours a week irrespective of whether there's business or not?
Yep, we're going to get into that in a second. It's actually worse than that. You have to state in the job order in all your ads, specific statement that inbound, outbound travel will be reimbursed. Again, we're going to get into more details. You have to state in your ads, the employer guarantees to offer total number of hours equal to no less than 3/4 of the workdays in each 12-week period, beginning the first workday until the end of the work period, November 30th, whenever. All right? So, in that same handout where I gave you the language that I took from the website, from the regulations that state what you have to have in a contract with third parties, I also gave you 1 through 3 language of what should be in an ad, okay, or and in your job order. 1 through 3 is specifically lifted from the regulations, okay? And then I added 4, 5, 6, and 7. 4 says employer will use a single work week for computing wages starting each day. That's your definition of what that work week is. Number 5 states that H2B workers will be reimbursed during the first work week for visa processing related costs except passport costs. Again, that's language that's 4 and 5 are explicit in the regulations. It's just in a different area of the regs. So all of that has to be in your ads. Your ads are going to go from average of $250 to probably $1,000 an ad per occupation.
Or more.
Or more. All right, all that language is required now. And if applicable, benefits including, and then deductions. Now, what do I mean by benefits? Anything that increases their pay. Let me just finish this up, and then we'll stop for 5 minutes. I guess they need a 5-minute break. Benefits include bonuses, incentive pay, boarding, lodging, daily transportation. Anything that you help your H2Bs with, you have to offer to U.S. workers. If you have arranged privately 6 rooms down the street, and you've put them aside and for your employees to negotiate with their workers, you have to put that in the ad that you help find local housing with your U.S. workers. Okay? And we talked about deductions. Anything other than required by law, if you're going to touch their pay, you've got to disclose it, again, in the prevailing wage form, in your ads, in the job order. And then obviously the employer's name and the local workforce agency. Yes?
We offer, say, medical, dental, vision insurance,
Absolutely.
voluntary after a certain point in their employment.
Has to be included.
We have to state it in the ad,
Yep,
even though they may not elect.
correct. Benefits available. Medical health benefits available. Yes?
What ads are you referring to?
We have to do, and that's the next slide. You have to do 2 ads. One has to be a Sunday newspaper ad. You have to physically post it in 2 conspicuous places, so that's back. All right, it used to be that you didn't have to post it the last couple of years. It's going to be on the job order, so it's going to be posted across all states' unemployment systems. It's going to be at the work center here, the career work office in Hyannis. And if you use electronic posting, you can post it electronically. Further, the regulations state that the state can order you to submit a copy of that job order to any unions, even if you're not a union shop. If they believe that there's a union that has excess labor, you have to provide them with notice. So if you're a landscaper or you're a construction company and you are not a union shop, that the SWA could ask you to send a copy of that job order to that union shop. Okay, I don't know if they will, that's just something they can do. All right, I guess let's break for 5 minutes, and we're almost done with just the requirements to get an H2B. We've got another 12 slides on your obligations. Take 5 minutes.